The Clockmaker's infinite thread. In the village of Ebenwer, where the mountains loomed like silent sentinels and the mist draped the streets in a perpetual shroud, Elias Vorn lived in a crooked shop at the edge of town, its windows fogged with the breath of 1,000 clocks that ticked and talked in a cacophony of defiance against the natural order, for no two ever agreed. Some raced ahead as if chasing tomorrow, others lagged behind, clinging to yesterday, and a few stood still, their hands trembling at the edge of a moment. They refused to release. The villagers, with their wind-chapped faces and suspicious eyes, called him a thief of time, a man who hoarded hours like a miser with gold, and though they bought his clocks for their uncanny beauty, they whispered curses behind his back, blaming him for the strange rhythms of their lives, crops that ripened overnight, winters that lingered too long, children who seemed to age in bursts or not at all. Elias, now 60 with a face carved by shadows and hands that shook not from frailty but from the weight of his secret, worked alone in his shop, surrounded by gears and pendulums, but beneath his workbench, hidden in a locked box of blackened oak, lay the source of his power, a spool of shimmering thread, thin as a spider's silk yet glowing with a light that pulsed like a heartbeat, a gift, or perhaps a shackle, bestowed upon him decades ago when grief had driven him to the edge of madness. It began 30 years prior, when Elias was a young man of 28, broad-shouldered and bright-eyed, married to Lyra, a weaver whose laughter could unravel the gloomiest day. They'd built a life in Ebenwer, a small house with a garden where she grew flax for her loom, until a fever swept through the village like a scythe, claiming her in a single night, leaving Elias clutching her cold hand as the dawn broke without her. Devastated, he stumbled into the woods beyond the village, seeking a fabled well set to grant wishes, his boots crunching through frost as he muttered prayers to gods he didn't believe in, until he found not a well but a hollow tree, its bark split wide to reveal a core of blinding light, and from it came a voice, smooth as oil and sharp as a blade, offering him the thread with a promise, "Weave time as you will, but every stitch binds you tighter." Desperate, Elias took it, expecting to pull Lyra back from death's grip, but the voice laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and vanished, leaving him with the spool and no instructions, only the dawning realization that it couldn't resurrect but could bend, stretch, and steal the hours of the living world. He returned home, hollow but determined, and began to experiment, threading the shimmering strand through a clock's mechanism, watching in awe as the hands spun backward, returning him to the morning before Lyra's death, not to save her, for the fever still took her, but to hold her one last time, her smile of fleeting treasure he hoarded in his chest. From that moment, Elias's life became a tapestry of stolen time, each clock a new experiment in his growing obsession. He wove a pocket watch that stretched a sunset into hours so he could sit by Lyra's grave and feel her presence in the fading light, crafted a grandfather clock that looped a single day to relive a market fair where they danced, and even made a tiny mantle clock that froze a moment when a neighbor's child nearly drowned in the river, allowing Elias to pluck her from the water. Before time resumed its march, at first, he used the thread to help, threading clocks for the village, a farmer's harvest saved from a storm, a midwife given extra minutes to save a breech birth, but the power seduced him, and soon he was stealing for himself, unraveling nights to avoid the silence of sleep, hoarding dawns to bask in their solitude, his shop becoming a fortress of ticking chaos as the spool never dwindled, its thread infinite yet tightening around his soul like a noose. The village began to fracture under his meddling. Widow Marin, a sharp-tongued crone, swore she'd lived her husband's funeral twice, each time more vivid than the last, while young Tom, a shepherd, aged 10 years in a single summer, his flock scattered across fields that bloomed out of season. The villagers grew wary, their whispers turning to accusations, and though they still came to buy his clocks, drawn by their eerie precision, they spat on his doorstep as they left, calling him cursed, a man who'd bartered with something unholy. Elias, now gaunt and gray, barely noticed, his world shrinking to the glow of the thread and the endless clatter of his creations, his fingers bleeding from the constant winding, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights spent weaving. He might have unraveled entirely if not for Soren, a girl of 16 with hair like raven feathers and eyes that saw too much, who slipped into his shop one stormy night, her brother Cal having vanished 2 weeks prior during a frozen hour Elias had unwittingly crafted. She tracked the anomaly to him, her boots muddy from the woods, her voice steady as she demanded, "What did you do to him?" Elias, caught off guard, tried to stammer a denial, but Soren saw the spool's light leaking from the box and pried it open, the thread's glow bathing her face as she gasped. He confessed then, spilling his story, Lyra, the tree, the pact, the years of theft, expecting rage. But Soren, whose brother was her only kin, knelt beside him and asked, "Can you bring him back? Can you fix what you've broken?" And so began their pact, not of vengeance but of repair, two broken souls threading a needle through a world they'd both lost. Together, they embarked on a fragile mission to mend Ebenwer's time, Soren bringing a clarity Elias had long forsaken, her hands steady where his trembled, her resolve a tether as they unpicked his clocks one by one. They started with the smallest, a brass fob watch that had stretched a baker's morning, unwinding its thread and watching the village's bread rise on schedule again, then moved to a cuckoo clock that had looped a harvest festival, releasing days of trapped laughter into the wind. Each undone stitch lessened the chaos, but the thread resisted, wriggling like a living thing, and shadows began to gather at the shop's edges, faceless shapes born from the hollow tree, whispering threats in a language of rust and ruin, demanding their strand returned. Soren, undaunted, pushed Elias to confront his guilt, dragging him to the woods where the tree still stood, its light dimmer now, pulsing with anger. There, the voice returned, mocking Elias's weakness, offering to take the thread back if he surrendered his life. But Soren stepped forward, her voice cutting through the dark. "He's not yours yet," and proposed a bargain. They'd weave the thread into a single clock, one that held Ebenwer's time in balance, neither stealing nor hoarding but flowing as it should. The entity hissed, reluctant, but Soren's will, and the thread's own exhaustion, forced its ascent. Back in the shop, they worked for days, Elias's hands guided by Soren's, crafting a pocket watch of silver and bone, its face simple, its gears laced with every last glimmer of the thread. When they finished, the other clocks fell silent, their hands stilled, and Elias pressed the watch into Soren's palm, whispering, "For Cal, for all of them," before his body crumbled to ash, his pact fulfilled, his soul released. Soren stood alone as dawn broke, the watch ticking in her hand, steady and true, and walked into Ebenwer, where Cal stumbled from a dissolving shadow, alive, the village's time stitched whole at last. She kept the watch, a quiet guardian, knowing the thread's infinite cost had been paid, not in hours, but in the courage to let go.